everyone. Today I'd like to show you how to mix a loaf. I'm actually going to make 2 loaves in this bigger bowl, and I wanted to start by showing you what the starter looks like when it's ready to mix, when it's fully active. So I explained in another video that it should look very puffy on the top, and you can see how this is puffy and pillowy, and there's a lot of bubbles all around. And it's like a thicker, it's not so liquidy like before. Sometimes I like to do this and it takes a lot of the air out, and now you can really see how all the strings and the gluten that has formed. So this is what it should look like when it's active. If I took a spatula, the one I mixed it with, and put it in here, you would see how it's making that noise. I don't know if you can hear it on there, but it's very thick and stringy and sticky. So that's what starter looks like when it's ready to mix a loaf of bread. So here's the bowl, and then I also have this ready. Since I'm mixing 2 loaves, I had to have enough water for 2 loaves. If you're only mixing 1, you would start with, when you're a beginner, start with about 320 grams of water. And remember, it has to be spring water. So since I am doing a double batch, I have 2 glasses of water ready. And what I do is I measure it on my scale. I usually use about 325 per loaf. So 325 times 2 is 650 grams for a double loaf. And then I do put it in the microwave to warm it up a little. So it's warm to the touch. It's not hot, but it's just warm to the touch, and that helps the fermentation process. So 325 for 1 or 650 for 2. In most recipes that you see, you will see that people are using 700 grams for 2 loaves, or 350 for 1. That's a little bit higher hydration loaf. That's what they call that. But that's a great way to start also. I feel like the more water that you add, it's a little trickier of a dough to work with. So I usually keep it a little lower hydration. Here's my flour. You would use 500 grams for 1 loaf. I'm going to be using 1,000 grams because I'm doubling it. I have my Danish dough whisk all ready to mix. And then I also have my pink salt, but I'm going to show you that I don't mix that in the initial mix. I mix that after 40 minutes, and I'll show you that. I'm going to be using 250 grams of starter. So if you were mixing 1 loaf, that would be 125. It varies. So starter only changes how fast your dough ferments. So you can add, in 1 loaf, you can do 80 grams, you will see in some recipes, up to 150 grams. For a double recipe, you might see people using 200 grams all the way up to 300 grams. So it just changes how quickly your dough ferments. I'm going to be using 250 for a double batch. Okay, so here we go. Let's get started. I'm going to first put in the water. Remember, I use 325 if I was making 1, but 650 since I'm making 2. Now I'm going to take this. I'm going to move my camera up a little bit. I'm going to take this bowl and put it on the scale. Make sure it says 0 grams to start. And then I'm going to put it back to 0. That's really important because otherwise you'll lose track of how much of the ingredients you're putting in. So here's my starter. I'm going to pour that in up to 250. If I don't have 250 in here, I'm not going to worry about it. But you can see how thick it is when I'm pouring it in. That means it's active and ready to go. And then some people say that a rule of thumb is that it should be floating on the top of the water. And mine is floating, but then, you know, other people say, oh, that's not true. That doesn't mean your starter's ready. So it's so thick, it's not really pouring in. I'm only at 150 right now. So I really have to scrape the sides and get all of this in. And remember, to grow my next starter, besides the fact that I have a whole bunch in the refrigerator that I can use to grow my next batch, I can scrape this out almost down to nothing, and I'll still be able to grow my next starter from that. I have done this enough that I know how much to add in flour and water to my starter to make a batch or a double batch of bread. So this is like empty and I'm at 252. So this just happens to be the perfect amount for me to grow my starter. So here it is. You can see it's floating on top of the water. That's a good sign. It's thick, it's bubbly. It's definitely ready to mix a batch of bread. So I'm going to put it back to 0 again before adding my flour. So here we go. Now double batch, 1,000 grams of flour. If you're making 1 loaf of bread, 500. That's just barely over 1,000, so I'm going to say that's good. Take it off the scale. Put the scale aside. And then this is when I mix it using my Danish dough whisk. Just to make sure I have all the flour mixed in. You don't want to have any powdery flour left over when you're done mixing. So this just takes a little bit. And of course I can hear Winnie barking to come in. And this just takes patience to get it all mixed in. Honey's already laying by my feet because she has to watch every single thing I do when I'm baking. Okay, so I get it to where I'm about right here. It's almost all mixed in. I take my hands and clean off this dough whisk. And put that aside. And then, this is one of the reasons I wear my gloves. I get in and mix it with my hands to make sure it's all mixed in. And you just kind of dive in and start mixing. Get all the flour. You will hear people say who make sourdough, you will hear them say it starts out as a shaggy dough. And as I show you how to mix a loaf or a batch of bread, I will show you how that dough changes from shaggy into very smooth dough as the gluten develops. And I really like to mix it because it really starts to the fermenting process. And this is just flour and water. See how it is? It moves the whole bowl because it's so thick and sticky in the beginning. And if you use a plastic bowl, it's hard to get it to stay on the counter. So at least these glass bowls are really heavy. Okay, so now my gloves are full. This would be your hands. Although if you get your hands wet, they don't get quite as sticky. Okay, then I take my gloves off and put those aside. And then this is when I take the scraper and I try to clean the sides. Get all that extra flour off the sides. And then I flip over the dough a little bit. So that's what it looks like when you first mix your flour and water. And then I stop and add the salt in about 40 minutes. So what I do at this point is, of course, I have my warming mat. Have that all ready. Put this on here. Oh, and I have to get my shower cap. Cover it up. If you don't have shower caps, that's completely fine. You can just put a tea towel over the top to cover the dough, or you can even use saran wrap. So see how easily those pop right on. And then I make sure my mat is turned on, and I usually set it to 92. That doesn't mean my dough will become 92 though, it just heats my dough up, but it doesn't turn it to that temperature. And then I'm gonna cover this up and let it sit. Then I'll come back and add the salt in the next video. So then I say, Alexa, set timer 40 minutes.
40 minutes, starting now.
And then I will start the next video. So that's just simply mixing the flour and water.